Hello! How about Mr. Grabbit the Rabbit? This is Mimi's book when she was a little girl. Let me read it. It's been a long time since I read it. Once there was a greedy old rabbit. Everyone called him Mr. Grabbit because he liked to have just lots and lots of everything. He had lots of shoes and lots of coats and lots of hats and lots of toothbrushes. He had piles of carrots and cabbage and turnip and lettuce in the cellar. And he had so many blankets and pillows heaped on his bed that he had a hard time finding his way out in the morning. There he is. Oh, you can see his ears. But that's about it. One day, Mr. Grabbit took such a long time getting out of bed that he was late to the market. Many people were there before him, but old Mr. Grabbit just pushed everybody aside and grabbed the biggest carrots and turnip and squash and cabbage he could find. He piled his market basket high with vegetables. He stuffed his pockets full of them. He put a big cabbage on his head, strapped a basket on his back, and started up the hill towards his house. There goes old Mr. Grabbit, the people said as he went by, carrying home enough food for 20 rabbits. Wow, look at him. Look at the cabbage on his head. What a silly old rabbit. When he got almost to the top, down tumbled the pumpkin and the cabbages. After them went Mr. Grabbit's carrots and turnip and squash and lettuce. And after them went Mr. Grabbit himself, running as fast as he could. At the bottom of the hill, he found his vegetables scattered everywhere. It was a long, hard job to pick them all up again and carry them home. Look at them. They're everywhere. Just as he came to the front porch, the milkman arrived. On the porch with a bottle of cool milk. Mr. Grabbit was very hot and thirsty, so he drank every drop of it. Another bottle for me, he shouted to the milkman who had started across the street, and he drank it all, even though his coat was beginning to feel very tight. Another bottle for me, he shouted again. He drank all that too, and now his coat began to feel very, very tight. But every time the milkman started to leave milk at the neighbor's house, Mr. Grabbit called him back. At last he had drunk up all the milkman's milk, and the neighbors had none. Look at all the bottles of milk. And now, he said to himself, either I'm too big for my coat or my coat is too small for me. So off went Mr. Grabbit to buy a new coat. But one coat wasn't enough for Mr. Grabbit. He bought a blue one, and a pink one, and a yellow one, and a purple one with green stripes. Then he saw some people trying on hats, so Mr. Grabbit hurried over to the hat counter to buy the best ones. He bought a red one with a blue band. He bought a green one with a feather. He bought a gray one and a yellow one, and he put them all on his head and walked home. Look, he's got 2 or 3 jackets on, and he's starting to put the hats on too. When people saw him, they laughed and said, there goes old Mr. Grabbit with a store full of hats on his head. The next day, old Mr. Grabbit wanted to visit his cousins, but it looked like rain. Oh dear, he said to himself, Which umbrella should I carry? The red and yellow one? Perhaps the orange and green dotted one? Or the silk one with purple horses on it? Or the blue one with roses? He thought, and finally he started out carrying all four. Look at all the hats on his head. And there's all his jackets. And look, he's even got all kinds of umbrellas. What a silly rabbit. He had just come in sight of his cousin's house when whoosh! Along came a big wind and whisked him away. Away sailed the umbrellas with Mr. Grabbit hanging on for dear life. Away he sailed past the doctor. The doctor tried to catch Mr. Grabbit, but he missed. There's the doctor running after him, but he can't go fast enough. Away he sailed past the kindergarten teacher. The kindergarten teacher tried to catch Mr. Grabbit too, but she couldn't. Whee! Mr. Grabbit began going up in the air. Up, 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 up he went, above the schoolhouse, and up, up, up above the church. Bang! Mr. Grabbit bumped against the church steeple. He held on tight. Away flew all of the umbrellas. Look at the wind. Wow. Mr. Grabbit held on to the steeple so long that his arms began to hurt. He tried to find a place for his feet. He kicked something, bong. It was the big bell in the steeple. Bong, bong, bong. It sang in a loud, deep voice. Gracious sakes, exclaimed the people down below. Why is the church bell ringing at this time of the day? They all jumped up and ran out of their houses. Look, there he is, hanging on. And the people are coming. What do you think they'll see? A minute later, the fire engine came clang-clanging down the wide road. A big crowd gathered to watch while the firemen put up a long ladder, and one of them climbed up to Mr. Grabbit. Wow, it's a good thing. There's a fire truck, and they're climbing the ladder. Look at him. Woo, there he is. How do you happen to be up here, please? The fireman asked politely. Mr. Grabbit told him, well, I never said the fireman. Who ever heard of 4 umbrellas? He put Mr. Grabbit on his back and carried him down, down, down the ladder. Then they took him home in the fire engine and put him to bed. Mr. Grabbit stayed there for 3 days. When he got up at last, he made a big sign and tacked it on his house. The sign said, "Come to Mr. Grabbit's sale, Saturday at 3 o'clock." What do you suppose he's going to sell? On Saturday afternoon, everybody in the village was in Mr. Grabbit's front yard. 20 people bought Mr. Grabbit's shoes. 16 people bought Mr. Grabbit's coats. And 30 people bought Mr. Grabbit's hats. 25 people bought Mr. Grabbit's umbrellas. Wow, they all bought something. After the sale, Mr. Grabbit had a wonderful picnic for his guests. They ate turnip and cabbages and lettuce and carrots and squash. Mr. Grabbit was proud to have so many friends. They're all enjoying the food. After that, Mr. Grabbit always waited his turn when he went to the market, and he bought only what he needed. He drank 1 bottle of milk, and when he was thirsty, he wore 1 hat and 1 coat and carried 1 umbrella when he went out and nobody called him Mr. Grabbit anymore. Isn't that a nice story?